Hey everyone, Christina Semmens with Say Yes to Holiness here, and I am back. Um, it's been a couple of weeks. I think I struggled. I was coughing, hacking almost just over 2 weeks ago. And I had just gotten back from being gone with my mom and son as we were gone during Christmas week. And it's something of 2025. It's been now just over 2 months since my husband passed away. For those of you who haven't been following, and this is not to sit there and focus on that, but rather just kind of marking time for you. And one of the biggest things that I am excited about for 2025 is the reality that this is a Jubilee year. For those of you who aren't familiar, the church in particular, and this is scriptural, in which God Himself called for a Jubilee year every 50th year. But recently, the Catholic Church has gone to celebrating them every 25 years. Actually, we had an extraordinary year of Jubilee in 2016. Pope Francis called for the extraordinary Jubilee year of mercy. And this year is a ordinary year of Jubilee, but it is a year of hope, being pilgrims of hope. And I can't think of anything more pressing right now in our world than to be people filled with hope. And it's very important right now. We're getting ready to, in the United States at least, inaugurate a new president, President Donald Trump 2.0. This will be his second term. And regardless of what you might think, positive, negative, of his personal behavior, how he acts, et cetera, the fact is that he still will be our president, period. So I think it's so appropriate that it also happens to be started today, the beginning of the uh, year, the week of prayer for Christian unity. This happens every year that we have a week in which we focus upon what unifies us rather than divides us. And I wanted to kind of spend a little bit of time focusing on really striving for unity in this year of Jubilee, because a Jubilee year was all about reconciliation. It was all about putting things right. So, in other words, debts were forgotten, family lands were returned to families that maybe had lost them for whatever reason. There was a reconstitution of everything becoming right again. Justice was brought about in all forms. And so a year of Jubilee was truly a great celebration for good reason. So one of the things that we can do, especially during this Jubilee year, and a lot of people have reached out and said, "Hey, Christina, what should I be doing during this Jubilee year? What's the big deal?" And one of the things that we'd be striving for would be unity. Unity in our families, unity in our personal lives, in the sense of a unified life, integrated life, and within our communities and within the world. And so I'm going to touch on a few of those as I share a little bit of food for the head, heart, hands, and feet today. And let's get to it. So, our food for the head comes from Thomas Watson, and he is a Christian writer. He writes, "There is but one God, and they that serve him should be one. There is nothing that would render the true religion more lovely or make more proselytes to it than to see the professors of it tied together with the heartstrings of love. If God be one, let all that profess him be of one mind and one heart, and thus fulfill Christ's prayer, that they all may be one." I share this as food for the head because so often we'll get wrapped up, our divisions, we get all wrapped up in the what is it that's different about what I believe, you believe, etc., particularly when it comes to religious traditions. And what unifies us is much greater than what divides us. You know, I am Roman Catholic, and that is something that I proudly profess. I became Catholic. I was raised Protestant. I was raised Presbyterian, and I became Catholic for a myriad of different reasons. And, this podcast isn't about that, but rather it's about the fact that within Catholicism, I found a home for everyone. I think James Joyce was the one who said, "Here comes the church, here comes everybody." And that's what we, as people who profess Christ, Christians, that is what it should look like. Here comes everybody. There is no one who is turned away. Everyone is given that cold drink of water. Everyone is embraced. Everyone is welcomed. And this is something that so often, because we know that we're sinners, we know that we are not, perfect. We know that we all have flaws. What we do is that we tend to then want to exclude other people because of flaws that we can see on the outside. We know that they can't be perfect, so therefore let's exclude them, kind of on the front. And there's a very human tendency. So during this Jubilee year, one of the greatest things that we could do is to work for unity, to really work to welcome the stranger, to welcome those who are different. Again, very human tendency, the other, kind of be afraid of it. But the fact is for us to strive to see myself in the other. This is where that phrase to walk in someone else's shoes comes from, of when we step into someone else's perspective, when we step into their shoes, then we are able to understand that they are us. And this is what Christ was praying for when he said that they all may be one. We need to be of one mind and one heart. And what is that one mind and one heart? God's. It's God's mind, it's God's heart. That we are striving to put on Christ and to become one with Him. And nothing, as Thomas Watson says, nothing would be more powerful of a witness, of an example, of a model that this is the true religion, that this is God, than to see all of us tied together. Beautiful phrase he uses, with the heartstrings of love. If God be one, then let us profess that we are of one mind and one heart. And what's that one mind and one heart? Is God's mind. It's God's heart. So we need to put on Christ. We need to put on God's mind and heart. And how do we do that? Well, we root ourselves in His Word. We begin with His Word and what He tells us. And so often we don't do that, do we? Instead, we're listening to our podcast. We're focusing on all sorts of stuff. Sports, we're in the middle of NFL playoffs now, or just, at least a wild card. And, for those of you who don't follow football, that's fine. But my point still is that we'll get all caught up in all sorts of other stuff, and we don't spend time in God's Word. God's Word will allow us to take on His mind and His heart. So we need to be very intentional. So during this year of Jubilee, we have that opportunity to be very intentional about doing this, about rooting ourselves in His Word. We can do this in all sorts of ways. We can do it through scripture study. We can do it through meditation. We can do it, through all sorts of different ways. But the fact is that we need to do it. We need to, every single day, be able to turn to His Word and look to Him for what should my mind and my heart be today. So that would be probably one of the great suggestions that I have for really being able to find unity during this Jubilee year. And that's to root yourself in His Word so that you can have His mind, His heart, and then we will all be one. Our food for the heart comes from Patricia Ennis, and she says, The choice to withhold forgiveness slowly but effectively destroys family unity. Now, we can be looking at the micro level, at the family level of myself and my family. And this is usually where how many of us who just got through the holidays, how many of us sat through awkward conversations, or maybe they weren't awkward because we didn't have the courage to have them. Um, you know, but one of the greatest things that happened on the trip that my mom and my son and I took, 3 generations, was that we had time to have those conversations, not about solving issues, but about saying, hey, no matter what, I love you. And there's nothing that you're going to do or you're going to say that's going to change that I love you. And we need to say that to one another instead of cutting someone out of our lives because they happen to have voted for one person or another, for example. I heard way too much of that. This is not how we become one. This is not how we bring about unity in our own lives, in our families, in our communities, and in our countries and in our world. This isn't how we do it. We need to choose to forgive for whatever offense we think somebody has offended us with. And it actually might be a very concrete offense that you can point to, and everyone's like, oh, yeah, yeah, definitely offended you. Okay. Definitely hurt you. Definitely was wrong. But we still need to choose to forgive. Why do I say this? Because forgiveness doesn't, wipe away what they did. Rather, forgiveness is giving ourselves permission to move on, to let go of it, and to not allow that poison of that pain of whatever it was that happened or was said to continue to poison your life. You're setting it aside. And the only way you can truly set that aside is to forgive. Once again, this is not accepting it. This is not saying, oh, it's okay. But, probably one of the greatest quotes I've ever heard is not forgiving someone is like drinking poison and thinking that that's going to kill the other person. It doesn't work. Okay. So if we want to bring about unity in our own lives, we need to let go of those grudges. We need to let go of those things that we've been holding on to maybe for decades of where, well, such and so didn't do this, or they weren't there at that, or they said it. Get over it. And I don't mean that in an uncharitable or lack of empathy. You need to get over it so that you can move on and become the person that you are supposed to be. But you're dragging around this baggage. You're dragging it around. Now, there's a whole different thing between forgiveness and reconciliation. Okay, that's a whole different topic. We can talk about that at some point if you want me to. But forgiveness is really primarily about you. You forgive. And then there might be a possibility of reconciliation, and it might not be appropriate to reconcile. That's fine. But don't keep dragging around stuff that is poisoning you, that is keeping you from a true year of Jubilee, a year in which you can truly rejoice, in which you can be filled with hope, in which you can experience peace. So, one of the biggest things that we can do is to let go of any grudge, any thing that you've been holding on to. If you're still thinking about what such and so said to you in 6th grade, it's time to let it go. You need to let it go. Not for them, but for you. Our food for the hands comes from Jonathan Edwards. He writes, "A man of a right spirit is not a man of narrow and private views, but is greatly interested and concerned for for the good of the community to which he belongs, and particularly of the city or village in which he resides, and for the true welfare of the society of which he is a member. Okay, everybody, all you political junkies out there, this gives you permission to be, greatly interested and concerned for the good of the community, okay, to which you belong. But not to get so wrapped up in the how are we getting there, but the fact that we got to get there. So this is why unity is so important. Right now, we need, especially as we're getting ready to inaugurate our next president, we need unity. We need to be concerned for the good of our community, but not in such a way that we demonize other people. We need to be particularly concerned about our own city or village, our own town, and where we reside, because it's there that change starts. It is in our local community that we will then bring about goodness and beauty and be able to share the truth that we are all brothers and sisters. That's what happens in community. And when we do it locally, then what happens is that it spreads out. It's like a ripple in a pond. Okay? Same concept. Unfortunately, too often we get so wrapped up in the national stuff. And I'm not saying don't be attentive to what your congressman is doing or your senator is doing or what Congress is doing. Okay? I'm not saying don't pay attention to it, but I'm saying you start locally. And then you take action at your state level, and then you're impacting at a national level. If we can show that we can be unified in our local communities on an issue, then we're able to share with our congressman, who is our local representative in the Congress, okay? We're able to share with them, this works. We are able to bring about unity on this issue, and this is what we want you to try and bring unity at the national level too. You share that same thing with your state legislator, okay? But we need to be involved. We need to not just check out. We need to not go, oh, that's just the way politicians are. No, politicians are that way because we allow them to be that way. There is no accountability, therefore, they don't have to be responsible. How many times, okay, I'm going to take it down a level. How many times, for those of us who have kids, we allow something to happen, okay? So, real minor thing. All the toys, kids are playing with toys and they don't clean them up. They're responsible for cleaning them up. We have made this clear that this is the standard, that once you play with your toys, you put your toys away. But if we never hold them accountable for putting their toys away, is it ever going to happen? No, it has to be an expectation. We have to have a standard. But we also have to enforce that standard. We also have to do the same thing locally, statewide, and nationally. And there's no better time to do that than now. Regardless of what it is that you believe that government should be about, you need to add your voice in a reasonable way, not shouting and demonizing the other person or, the other side. There's no sides in this. We are all together. That's what unity is. We're all in this together. If Social Security goes away by, 2035 at this point, okay, if it goes away in 10 years, that's all on us. If we don't want it to, then we need to be doing the work necessary in order to make sure it doesn't happen. That's a real big issue, and I just simplified it, but my point still remains. We have a responsibility. We need to step in. And during a year of Jubilee, there's no better time than to do it. So pick one thing that you're like, this will make my family better, this will make my community better, and potentially it would make, so for example, you're a huge advocate about climate change. You don't need to believe climate change, doesn't matter, okay? What's one thing that you can do in your family, in your community, in your church, that is going to make a difference in climate change? Well, one of the biggest ones that everybody talks about is recycling. Okay. So is your family recycling? Are you recycling? Are you taking the time to take all those little aluminum cans and are you taking them to be recycled? Now, I could make the argument and say that corporations should be switching to something else that we don't have to recycle because it's not, our issue, but it's their issue, but a whole different whole different conversation. Anyway, but the fact is that you can make a difference. So you can make a difference in your own family, and then you could encourage your neighbors to do that. Now, it might be that you don't have a recycling truck that comes by. Find out why. Find out why your neighbors aren't recycling. Why is it that they're tossing all their cardboard out into and I'm guilty, okay, big cardboard, boxes and tossing them out on the curb, and then the dump truck comes along and picks them up instead of them going to recycling. Okay, so make that difference. Start there. Choose one thing this year that you're going to enact in your own life in order to bring about more unity. How does like recycling bring about unity? We're all in it together for a common cause. Might disagree about why we're doing it, okay? But it's still good for our community. So there you go. So our food for the feet comes from John F. Walvoord. Probably mispronouncing his name. My apologies, John. But he says the only way it is possible to have one mind is to have the mind of God derived from the unity of the Spirit of God. A unity which comes only when believers find the will of God and give themselves unselfishly and unstintingly to its fulfillment. Right there, here is this could be our vision statement for this year of Jubilee. There it is. For us to find the will of God and give ourselves unselfishly and unstintingly to its fulfillment. So this begs kind of a question of, okay, so what is the will of God, Christina? How do I find it? Well, it goes back to being rooted in his word is one thing. But then the will of God is found in our daily life. Where is it that you are right now? Are you a mom? Are you a dad? Being a parent. Are you married? Being a spouse. Are you a single person that is in a workplace? Your workplace is where you are supposed to be living out God's will. So the primary piece, though, is that all of us, the will of God for all of us, regardless of what your vocation is, regardless of what your state of life is, regardless of what you are doing, you are to become a saint. That is God's primary will for you. That is your primary vocation, to become a saint. Now you might be saying, oh, Christina, I'm not a saint. I can't become a saint. Yes, you can. I'm telling you that you can. Why do I know this? Because God made you. He created you for greatness. He didn't create you as a mistake. He didn't create you and say, oh, well, I messed up on that one. I'll try again with the next one. And, I won't worry about that person. That's not how it works. God created you for greatness. And greatness is about unity with him for all eternity. And that's what a saint is. A saint is someone who is united with God for all eternity in heaven. That's who a saint is. And that's what all of us are called to. That's where this whole say yes to holiness thing came from to begin with, of where it was like, people would ask me that, I was mentoring them, I was working with them, in different things. And they'd be like, Christina, what's this thing about that call to holiness thing? And it was like, that's your primary job. And it's like, well, I'm a husband, I'm a wife, I'm a parent, I'm working, I'm a lawyer, whatever. And they'd be like, how am I supposed to be a saint? You do it each and every day by becoming the person God created you to be. Nothing is greater. Saint Irenaeus said this back in the 2nd century. Nothing brings about God's glory more than man fully alive. We are fully alive when we are completely ourselves. And we are shining examples of God's abundance, creativity, everything, because He created you. He created me, He created you, He created everybody. And when we realize that and we recognize the diversity and just the magnificence of God's creation, then we'll be able to go, oh, God's will for me is to become holy, to become perfect like Him, to be a saint, and to be His hands and feet in the world, sharing His love and His mercy with other people here, and then to be a shining example and witness of it in heaven. That's what we're all called to. So if we focus on that, my job this year is to become as much, grow in holiness as much as I can. And I do it unselfishly and I do it unstintingly to its fulfillment. If we do that during this Jubilee year, we will experience a unity and a harmony within ourselves, as well as with others, as well as with nature, but especially with God. So that is the challenge. That's what I put before you as you are beginning this year of Jubilee. And I'm going to leave you with one quote, and it's from Charles H. Brent. He writes, "The unity of Christendom is not a luxury, but a necessity. The world will go limping until Christ's prayer that all may be one is answered. We must have unity, not at all costs, but at all risks. A unified church is the only offering we dare to present to the coming Christ, for in it alone will He find room to dwell." So there's your vision for this year of Jubilee, that we take all the risks, we work for them unstintingly and unselfishly. We do that so that we can create that unified church and present that church to Christ. Not church as in a building, but church as the body of Christ, of which each of us is a part. I hope that this is a most wonderful holiday weekend for you. Talk about a vision. Martin Luther King Jr. definitely gave us that with his I Have a Dream speech. In the same way, let us be a witness and an example to others of unity and of hope as we embark upon this Jubilee year. God bless everybody. Talk to all of you soon.